Hey there, retail enthusiasts. I'm Isha Dalal, Solutions Architect at AWS.
And I'm Claudia Howlett, Enterprise Account Manager. We're coming to you from Sydney, Australia.
Welcome to Retail Insights with AWS, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of retail, uncover the latest trends, and explore how AWS is transforming the industry.
From the aisles to the cloud, come and join us as we dive under the hood with industry leaders and AWS retail experts. We will explore the latest trends in customer experience, supply chain optimization, and data-driven decision-making.
So grab a cup of coffee, you're logged into Retail Insights with AWS. Welcome to this episode of Retail Insights with AWS. We have an amazing guest, Marcella Larsen, with us today. She is the founder of the Woven Group, and she has been an amazing leader into the retail space. She helps business organizations with technology, data, and AI, how they can leverage the value of it. Thank you, Marcella, for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Today, we're focusing on the rising trend of customer lifetime value, otherwise known as CLV. This is a strategic marketing metric and is one of the most significant trends that are emerging, as a new recent report from Marketing Customer Benchmarks from MI3 have since produced. This surging focus on CLV is now becoming embedded as a core marketing KPI across organizations. These companies who master the art of predicting, optimizing, and growing lifetime value will be the ones who are positioned to drive long-term, sustainable growth with their customers. So, Marcy, curious, are you able to elaborate on what customer lifetime value, or CLV, means in the retail space and why it's becoming a rising indicator of success for retailers?
Sure. It's definitely coming up this year more than ever. And I think, Claudia, we saw that come out in a recent MI6 survey that was conducted in Australia. But we know it's a key metric to retailers around the world, and one that's showing up as a skills gap for CMOs. But to answer your question, customer lifetime value is the profitability of a customer over the lifetime they are engaged with a brand or a retailer. And that is why it is so key. And it is the key metric for the CFO and the CEO when thinking about the profitability and growth of the business.
It's really interesting around the profitability of a customer, because a lot of organizations these days really just talk about customer acquisition, how many customers that they can grow from a network perspective. Wondering if you can sort of elaborate on the profitability from a lifetime value perspective and how customers can get a little bit more targeted around making sure that they can get a profitability from a lifetime of a customer.
Great question, and fundamental to the consideration. Well, we know that customer acquisition costs are very high at the moment, to set some context. Any CMOs listening will certainly know about the deprecation of cookies, some recent gray, we'll call it gray information about Google letting customers opt in, which feels like it will end up being more expensive because we'll have to get into first-party data and purchasing that to be able to personalize for customers. So just throw on top of that the fact that organic search is very expensive and the costs are going up, driven by the likes of new players on the scene like Shein and Temu that are their largest customers.
Yep.
So we already know digital customer acquisition costs are high and will impact profitability when securing a new customer. So it's much more effective and profitable to retain the customers a retailer has today, and investing in that loyalty. So going back to CLV, again, we think about that profitability. How do I identify my most valuable customers that are the most profitable? And who will be my most profitable customers in the future? And who might be emerging segments or cohorts that I want to learn more about, experiment with, I've had to pay to bring them in. Maybe they won't be the most profitable, but I don't want to lose them after that investment.
I think it's important to understand that CLV is the core to understand the profitability of the business. And yes, customer acquisition costs are going higher. So how do you like elaborate to our listeners around how they can calculate this CLV or customer lifetime value? What does it mean? And how they can make sure that they keep track of this key metric for their organization?
Great. So I think, Isha, you mentioned too, this can get quite complex and off-putting. And so there's different definitions, we'll say, for CLV or levels of maturity. Throw on top of that, I see a lot of confusion with lifetime value, which is more consideration of the overall costs in retaining that customer by the firm itself. But with CLV, to calculate it, we can think about just kind of standard starting CLV and look at the customer acquisition costs in the past and how much profit has been made with that customer. We can actually then get better at that and building our muscle and bringing in more data and start to know on acquisition what the lifetime value of that customer will be, because that customer will have lookalikes with other customers from the past who have been profitable or not.
Yeah.
And as they stay engaged longer, we can get more accurate at calculating that. So where things start to get more complex, but highly possible today, I don't want to off-put anyone, is if we start to take individual customers and compare them to each other, we really need to kind of date stamp them and put them in cohorts. So if I've acquired a customer 6 months ago, I can think about what they've spent and then normalize that for the next 18 months to compare and date stamp really in a 2-year cycle. So we can start to compare apples and oranges or apples and apples, and it becomes very interesting.
So if I take a simple example, like to start with, because we need to start small and simple and then add more complexities to it based on the businesses. So if I take a simple example of a coffee shop, and as an example, I have a customer named Mia. And she's coming to the coffee shop every day to grab 1 cup of coffee, which is $4. And she comes on a weekdays. So 1 cup of coffee, $4. For a week, it's $20. For a month, it's about $80. And for a year, it's about $940. So if I want to calculate the customer lifetime value for my customer, Mia, over a 5-year period, which is the lifetime that I'm considering at this point, it will be around $4,800. Would be a fair assumption to start with something as simple as that, and what else I need to consider when I'm thinking about CLV, like simplest way for the businesses to even make a start towards it.
I think that illustrates a great example there. And you've touched on the recency and the frequency. So you're considering how much she's coming in each week, what she's buying, is she starting to buy more? And you're using that to predict the future. Now, what we want to subtract from that were the customer acquisition costs that brought her in there. And did she come from SEO, digital marketing, or I think, Isha, you brought up the example of some of these apps that can bring in new customers to cafes because they offer a platform to engage and reward them. But ultimately, that coffee shop knows she is their customer and has that recency and frequency to be able to calculate that lifetime value.
I think sort of just listening to that example that you shared, it sounds like data is really key to underpinning, because all of the calculations behind how much a customer can be over the lifetime versus that cost of acquisition, you need to be able to have a lot of data points or insights to be able to predict what these customers are going to do and how you can then forward think and plan to ensure that you've got enough pipeline of customers to be able to grow your organization. So I think the question that I have, Marcy, is how crucial is data to a CLV, and how crucial is a data strategy for being able to back up these metrics like a CLV?
Claudia, it's absolutely fundamental. And I think that's where we're seeing the role of the CMO and marketing team evolve. We've been talking a lot about data-driven marketing for years, but this is the metric that brings that prowess all together. And the more data that you have, the better you will become at predicting that CLV. And also understanding when a customer might churn, seeing some behavior or a lack of frequency to trigger that and retain that customer. And that can become challenging because you've got to think about the data that you're getting out of all of the channels you live in. So it could be transactional data from the point of sale, what types of products they've been purchasing, what are their delivery preferences, do they come in store with click and collect, what are they buying online? That might be a different e-commerce system. And then how about the times when the customer may not be happy and they're calling in and you hopefully have a single view of the customer so you can identify that, ideally maybe in real time, but know, hey, this is a high value customer. We need to invest to save this relationship now.
Are there any sort of key indicators around saving? It's almost that sort of post-sale, post-experience that you have with customers. I mean, is there anyone that's doing it really well today that's starting to pick up on things like customer sentiment so they can extend the value of the lifetime of that customer? Is there any examples of people doing that today?
So retailers or brands who are great at this would be, we'll go back to the coffee example maybe. So the CLV for Starbucks customer is over $14,000. Wow. Pretty incredible. Wow. When you think that's based on $5 to $6 coffees and lattes coming in. And an odd example to use in this part of the world where we've got pretty amazing coffee here, but Starbucks has that ubiquity in reaching so many customers at scale. And that virtuous loop with them using the app and them learning about the customer and their preferences and the personalization and what to offer them. So they're doing that very well. And they're also leveraging that single view of the customer. So they could see if that frequency is stopping. Are their preferences changed? Do we need to do something to intervene? Do we present them with an offer to delight them, to keep them in the group? Or we're seeing a lot of investment there in building communities and the power of influencers within those communities. So they're very mature in this area, and their business model, quite frankly, is built on it.
You have touched base so many points that I want to explore and talk about just with this one example. But I will go back that one thread that you keep talking about from the start is about the cohorts, the high value customers. Like how does that, the segmentation of customers or creating cohorts of your customers is related to CLV, and how does business should think about it using data, using different technology that they can leverage, and how can the different, like the marketing, the finance, and the technology team work together towards this?
So this is such a key point with the board, the leadership team, CFO. And the goal is to make every customer profitable, but to also understand your high-value customers and the lifetime for those. Because if you understand your high-value customers, they do have the most profitability and the highest spend. And you can also start to add more frequency into their visits and more profitability once you understand them very well. And they're the key to the organization today and to growth. But you also need to have a handle on that other emerging category. And when are they crossing the chasm to become the high-value customers and most profitable customers of the future? So now we've been chatting a lot about Gen Z, and that's a super interesting space to be thinking about. And what is the behavior that they're exhibiting, and how might the business model even change so that there is more frequency and loyalty to keep them engaged for a lifetime?
I'll be honest, Marcy, going through TikTok and having a scroll, and when I have a look at a micro-influencer, say, for example, who's promoting a product, I often think, wow, did they just pick that up off the shelf and they've decided that this was the hot product of the month for them, and then they shared their amazing experience with the product, and then that happens to go viral. For me as a consumer, it seems like such a random process, and also quite genuine, because it's someone that's a micro-influencer. Might seem to me that they come off that they haven't been paid a huge lump sum of money from a brand sponsorship perspective. And so as a consumer, I trust their opinion. But it sort of goes back to that community aspect in which retailers seem to build. So I'm wondering if you could just sort of touch on how building communities and building that sort of social media presence around micro-influencers can really help to bring up and build that next generation of customers from a Gen Z perspective.
Claudia, it's such a good point. And it's such an incredible and powerful, authentic channel. Again, in this age where customer acquisition costs are very expensive in traditional digital channels. So I think that these communities of micro-influencers can kind of go two ways. One, where it does come across as random. Yep. They get a hold of the product. The brand or the retailer has no idea this thing is going to go viral and it's not in stock. Not a great situation for the retailer. Yeah. And then they don't know the behavior and how to keep that customer engaged for a lifetime. So they've been given a gift, but they didn't plan out that customer journey, let alone understand CLV. On the other side, we have quite brilliant, newer emerging, I don't even want to call them retailers, e-commerce companies, new players disrupting things. I'm going to go back to Shein. The power that they have with influencers and creating a community and building on that loyalty. They have a new channel. Yep. And those influencers are happy with the brand. They feel like they're influencing and new designs are even being created on their behalfs, and they're delighted to share with friends. And the virtuous cycle begins. And the amount of SKUs that they have in stock at any time is pretty crazy, and the amount of designs, because it's not like it's a small community of influencers who all follow certain trends. It's a mosaic of massive amounts of communities going out and sharing at that micro level, the power of networks. But they're also really good at data, and they're looking at this, and they can ramp up very quickly to respond to that demand. Unlike in the first scenario when it seems to come from nowhere. Yeah. So I think we're going to see that prowess around data and the use of micro-influencers and better monitoring around what's going on in that world go into the supply chain and inventory as well.
Yeah. Just going back to the TikTok example that you mentioned, yes, it is a micro-influencer and it gives you such a big steep if it gets viral. But what happens, the other side of it, that it's viral today and after 6 months the trend goes off? How does these smaller e-commerce businesses, or even the big ones as well, when they launch a new product, how can they adopt different CLV strategies to make sure those customers who are there today with you because of a trend stays with you? So what are the different strategies they can adopt to make sure that, yes, they have the business today, how can they make sure the CLV stays positive and keep growing?
Well, therein lies the challenge. And I think that the smaller emerging brands or retailers with growth aspirations need to be learning more about those cohorts and their preferences and where do they spend their time outside of the brands so that they can build in other service or product offerings for frequency. You know how we talked about frequency? And they can even look around partnerships with other brands to reach new audiences. So take an example of a pure play here where we sit in Australia that recently actually acquired another brand to bring in that range and their customers and 3 physical stores. So they're no longer a pure play. They're learning from those physical stores, acquired those customers to build more. So they're able to drive growth and more frequency of purchase through that approach. But then we see smaller pure play brands. We were talking about Casper in the US that grew significantly in COVID. But how many mattresses do you need to buy a year? Yeah. So they've got to form partnerships with other retailers that offer them access to new customers when they're not having to pay for that customer acquisition. So I believe Casper in the US started partnering with Target a few years ago. But I think we are seeing unique partnership forms with these smaller brands or leveraging marketplaces as well in their aspirations for growth.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because right on the forefront of that, the customers making decisions around where and how they purchase. It sounds like growing your network as a retailer beyond just e-commerce or what got you started as an organization is really then going to help bring customers on that journey with you, because as we all know, post-pandemic, a lot of people are wanting to shop in stores and try and buy. But kind of going back, so if we've got the accessibility of the product through our partner network, both from an e-commerce perspective and a physical retail perspective, going back to the earlier points of how can we get the product in stores and readily available for customers at the right time, at the right place, for the right customers. It sounds like it's a big orchestration of a number of different key people within organizations across supply chain, across finance, across operations, last mile. How can we deliver to our customers on time at the right time? So a much broader question that I have is, how can companies look at almost a full transformation from a culture perspective around data, customer lifetime value, and ensuring that each of the key different verticals under from an organization perspective can work effectively together to be able to bring the right things at the right time to the customers?
So that is nirvana. I think everyone's going to be on the journey to get there. And I'll bring it back to data because it's got to start with great data foundations and becoming data ready. And that's not going to happen overnight. But thinking about what are those critical core pieces of data that need to come together for customer lifetime value. But now you're starting to connect customer data and your high value customers and their preferences and how they want to be treated, what they like to purchase. Do you offer services with your products? Getting into the supply chain and your merchandise planning. So the roles that have traditionally been in the back office working in the spreadsheets now actually need to be much deeper connected with the marketing teams and the external trends to be able to act in real time and leverage the heck out of that supply chain. So the machine has to get going with unleashing that data and removing some of the barriers from the silos, and then thinking about how are you going to get that external data to better understand that customer behavior so that you can continue to be relevant throughout their journey.
I think it's coming back to the statement that a lot of people say is data is the new goal that you have in your organizations, that you can enrich a lot of value from that. But it is not just about all the data, I think. It's also about the quality of data that you have and how you are enriching value of the data. So it's very important for the technology teams to talk to their counterparts in the business that you have the data, but what sort of insights you want to get out of it, and what do you want to do with it, right? You have unstructured data, you have structured data, you have third-party data, you have marketing data coming all together in your business. Where are you storing it? How you are getting the right value out of it? And thinking it through, not just from the technology landscape perspective, but also from the business perspective. What does the finance team wants from that? What does the marketing team wants out of that? And how we can tie it as a story for our customer. You keep putting into the perspective of reaching out to high-value customer or different side of cohorts. So you can only identify how to reach out to those customers or personalize that experience once you understand the data, once you understand the habits of the customer, once you understand, okay, how are they going on Mondays? Are they shopping on Sundays? When do you need to launch the new product? What season? I think it all comes back as a story, and you need to work as a thread across the different organization within your business. So my question would be then that how do you see all this playing part as a good thread across the organization, and then meeting the business profitability through that? How do you see any customer doing it or business doing it very well today?
Well, there are a number of businesses doing it well today. I mean, in fact, it's ironic that I'm sitting here with Amazon and they're probably the gold standard. We've talked about Shein. I think Walmart's a great example, and they recognized early on that their highest value customers who were emerging, the millennials, in many cases we haven't talked about too much today, were shopping in both the online and the physical stores. And they were very clever about how do we create a new experience that brings together both. And they had to unite those data sets to do that and dust off some projects that in the past were considered actually a failure to relaunch them in a new way and get great at that. So it's having that discipline on the scorecard. Yeah. And we still talk about digital transformation, but this is a cultural shift, and it needs to be supported at the highest level to get the teams working together. And a modern marketer really wants to be best friends with that data analytics team because they can work in concert so well together. And I'll use an example, too. If you get really great at this stuff, and you can make sense of the data that you have, you can start to think about, well, where may I get data from different channels? And there's a great startup that's doing incredible work with the emerging value we have on sustainability, or we're seeing come to play. But what we often hear is, hey, my customers are telling me this is a value, but really I'm not seeing it play out in how they purchase. So what this startup is offering is a data-driven approach where you can sign up for their service. And when someone's in store, they can scan that barcode and learn about the sustainability and the journey of that product. But more importantly, they can actually go back to brands and tell them when the scan comes up with nothing, because they haven't actually marked anything about it.
Wow.
Yeah. And hey, there's a really great example of a data leak where there's some powerful data that may be highlighting over and over again. You're missing out on a cohort and a new emerging audience that wants to know, is your product sustainable? What was the journey? And they don't even know that exists. So I think it's a long way of answering. Get really good at unleashing the data that you know you have today, your customer data, your transactional data, and get really creative around where emerging data is coming from that may not even be that expensive. In this case, it's only something like $4,000 a month for a brand to sign up, and very powerful data. And that will be your secret sauce in such a competitive world today.
I love that. It's flipping the data on its head to see, right, what are we actually missing and what can we offer customers that we don't have today from like an insights perspective. I think another really great point that you touched on, Marcy, was, you know, innovation isn't just within the tech team. Innovation just isn't within, you know, R&D. Innovation from a data and a customer perspective is you know, threaded throughout the organization, but needs to be on the scorecard, on the metric of every function within the business in order for them to sort of work together. So the broader question that I really have is, how can customers get started? I mean, we often have these conversations with our customers. Do we build? Do we buy? Where can we invest? You know, for a customer that's like, right, I'm wanting to get started on building my CLV, what's your advice and where can they get started?
Sure. Well, maybe first kind of unpacking and understanding more what is CLV, what is lifetime value, what organizations are putting this on their scorecard, just so you're all speaking the same language. And get that support from the senior leadership team so you can get it on the metrics that matter. Because now you're starting to benchmark and look at the future value for customers. You can have new conversations and secure new investments in marketing, in technology, in breaking down those barriers to unleash that data. So the first step I would take is understanding this and getting senior leadership support to get it on a scorecard. Secondly, I would start with the basics. Look at the technology that you have today and what can you start to measure around CLV with that scorecard. You may have some out-of-the-box functionality with your marketing automation investments, your MarTech stack, even some BI dashboards you have in place to start with basics. And as you get great at this and get more data, you can build your way up to working with an in-house data analytics team, if you have one, to build out better models unique to your business. And this is going to enable some incredible conversations around new business models. Maybe you need to add services into the mix. Maybe you need to reinvent your loyalty program, have new partnerships. You'll be able to have very data-driven conversations and be able to work out some interesting what-if calculations.
I think we are coming towards the end of the podcast, but it's hard not to talk about AI.
Yes.
How do you see AI impacting the businesses, specifically when we talk about CLV? How businesses can leverage AI, and moreover, like in combination with something like a personalization, to help the businesses to improve their processes and reach out to the customers. I can see that a lot of businesses are investing in AI, but how do you see the CLV getting more value from the use of these new technologies that's coming up?
Well, I'm going to bring it back to first getting data ready, knowing what you have, where you can leverage AI. And some of these, let's say, out-of-box solutions already have it built in, which is great. And there should also be a governance layer that's built in with that too, so they don't have to worry about safety and some of the other things that come up. Secondly, I would say that it's embedding the process in. So not just leveraging traditional AI and machine learning around those models to know who the high-value customers are, but being able to personalize in real time to retain them. Being able to embed AI in other parts of the journey to retain those customers. And then probably lastly at the nirvana with where we're going, and we got to crawl and walk before we can run. Yeah. But knowing the possibilities of Gen AI, maybe Gen AI can be used in retaining that customer and seeing those triggers when they might attrit out if they're not having a good experience in that service call that's in. But even being able to predict in more what-if scenarios and test and learn for newer customers in the future, being able to map out Gen Z or even Gen A customer journey when you get really good at the basics.
Yeah.
No, I love that. It's super practical advice. Make sure that you can have it sort of woven throughout from a scorecard perspective, ensuring that you can have your data really clean to be able to make those insights and predictions, but also making sure that those teams can come together to be able to work towards a lifetime of retaining really high value customers. So, Marcy, we've come to the section of our podcast where we ask our guest what is their one top retail insight that they would give to retailers. So my question to you is, what's something that you'd like to share to our listeners and a piece of advice you'd like to leave them with?
Well, Claudia, from what I've observed, outstanding brands solve part of their data challenge with having an incredible loyalty program.
Yep.
And I guess it's a catch-22, but if the customer is declaring themselves and you know who they are, you can personalize from them, you can understand where they're spending, and collect that data over and over again for that virtuous cycle. It's a lot easier than having to go and get it somewhere else or figure out who non-declared customers are. So great way to solve part of the data challenge.
No, I think that's really great advice. I know that my friends and I were speaking about loyalty programs and what levels we were. So it's definitely a community that they build, and they're getting all the insights from us as to how we spend as consumers. So great advice. Thank you so much, Marcy. Now we've come to the end of our podcast, but firstly, I want to say a huge thank you for all of the research and the insights that you shared with us today. It's been incredibly insightful for us, and we've definitely learned a lot along the way. So thank you for being such an awesome guest, and we look forward to part 2 with you, Marcy.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited about the technology teams working closer with the business and these discussions you're bringing out to the retail universe.
Thank you, Marcy.
Thanks again for joining us on this deep dive into how AWS is empowering brands to take a more strategic, data-driven approach to customer lifetime value. Here are the key takeaways from our discussion with Marcy. First, we learned that the rise of CLV is a critical marketing KPI. It underscores the fundamental shift in how companies are thinking about their customer engagement. Rather than just focusing on short-term conversations, leading organizations are now taking a more holistic, long-term view of their customer journey and their lifetime value. The key takeaway is that mastering CLV is critical for building sustainable, profitable customer relationships in today's competitive landscape. Marcy also provided some great advice for marketing leaders looking to take on a more strategic, technology-enabled approach to CLV. Get the data right, invest in predictive modeling, and operationalize those insights across your organization. If you're interested in learning more about how AWS can support your CLV initiatives, I'd encourage you to check out the resources below. You can also connect with Marcy at wovengroup.au, or check out her website, wovengroup.au, to discuss your specific needs or challenges. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll be back with another episode exploring the latest retail trends and technologies. Stay tuned.